Right, so welcome back to Cybersecurity Hacking Fundamentals with White Hats. We've gone through quite a bit of content the past 4 weeks, so if you guys need any sort of recap, I'll just walk through a little bit of just an outline of what we did in the past few weeks. We touched on networking, so basically the ins and outs of how data is transferred over the internet and how we find devices on the internet. And we also talked a little bit about steganography, which is the idea of hiding information within other information. So the first few weeks were really about more beginner-friendly content, a little less technical, I would say. But this week we're going to be talking about something called hashing, which is a little bit more of a mathematical function. But again, we'll try to keep it simple and we'll try to keep it beginner-friendly. And as usual, all of our questions and answers can be put onto Padlet with the password of cyber hacking with white hats. And if you have any questions, feel free to post it there or post it on the chat, and we'll have our exco just bring the questions to the Padlet itself. And I'll just leave this here for a bit. But if you guys have this saved, then good for you. So, anyways, we'll be starting with an introduction to what passwords are, and I guess the ideas for why we store passwords in a certain way. And then we'll introduce you to hashing, and we'll introduce you to what assault is. And as usual, we have an ethics disclaimer. Just essentially be ethical with all the information you learn, and don't do anything that is considered unethical. Okay, now moving on to the content, we have what a password is. Essentially, when you use a password, and if you think about it, it's just a secret that only you should know, that you use to access hidden or restricted areas on the internet. Stuff like your Instagram accounts, your Facebook accounts, or even your Google accounts. All these things require some sort of login, which allows you to access private information. And passwords are meant to be stored within yourself. So it's meant to be a secret that you keep such that nobody else has access to these places. But to access these services in the first place, you actually have to send the passwords over the internet, right? So let's say I want to log into the school's website. I have to send in my school password through the internet to the school's web server such that they can actually process it. So what happens if we have a hacker or like a malicious actor that sits in between my connection with the school? So this is what we call a man-in-the-middle attack, where someone actually intercepts our traffic before they continue sending off to the intended destination. And if you remember from our second lesson where we did our networking, we actually talked about Wireshark and essentially packet sniffing. So that's a third lesson, yeah, sorry. So when we packet sniff, we're essentially looking into data and we can actually figure out what's being sent through the internet. And as long as we're within a chain of data, then we can actually read all this information going through the internet. And we had a demo where we actually showed the username and password through this data stream. So of course, if this was so simple, everyone would be doing it and we'll have so many password breaches every day, right? But the one thing that you need to have, a man-in-the-middle attack is to intercept the network traffic in some way. And to intercept network traffic, you either have to trick the user into sending data to you first. In this case, you have to have a proxy service, which is essentially a service that takes data coming in and redirects it for the user. Or you trick him into thinking that you are a trusted authority or you are the Wi-Fi router. So for example, if you're on a unsecured, let's say you are in the public and you just see a free hotspot, you should always be careful about these hotspots because these hotspots could actually be a malicious actor setting up what we call a honeypot and trying to trick you into sending data through them. We also have something called ARP poisoning, which is a bit more technical, and I won't cover this in this lesson, but essentially within a local network, you trick the user into thinking that your device is actually the router. So when they look for the right IP address, they translate it into a hardware address, but it's actually the wrong address. And this translation of IP addresses is something we touched on in the second lesson of our course. So I hope some of these things I guess, helps you contextualize the things you learned in the past few weeks. And I hope that knowledge carries over to this and gives you guys a bit more of a bigger picture of the entire the model. But as I said, if it was so simple, we will have so many attacks every day. Luckily, we actually have something called the transport layer security, which is essentially security for data you send over the internet. So whenever you go to a website with HTTPS, and we mentioned this in the fourth lesson as well, what happens is that it takes your data and it encrypts it with a key. So a key is just like what you expect. You can use a key to lock something, and you can use a key to unlock something. And in this case, when we talk about encryption, we use a key to encrypt data, and then we use a key to also decrypt data. And on the web, essentially we take a key and we lock our data, or in this case, we encrypt it before it's sent off to the web server. So in this case, even if the man in the middle intercepts the data is gibberish in the sense that they can't actually read what this data is, and they can't actually decrypt it because they don't have the key. And when it reaches the web server will have a key which you can then take to unlock this data and retrieve the password again. So HTTPS essentially protects you from man-in-the-middle attacks up to a certain extent. Of course, there are other more advanced topics such as certificate. I forgot the technical term, but certificate forgery, where they actually pretend to be the person issuing the key, such that the key you have is actually fake. In which this case, the attacker will have the key that you used to lock your data, and then they can pretend to be secure, and you have a whole other issue. But there's an entire field, or there's an entire system that tries to minimize these things from happening. And if you're interested in learning more about this, you have to look up what's called a root authority and certificate authorities. So these people actually issue keys out to people, and you use these root keys to create more keys, such that you can have a whole entire network of people who have keys, and everyone can verify each other. So you have keys that are checked by other keys, which are checked by other keys, which are checked by the top of the entire chain. And just to note, in case you guys are interested, on the internet, HTTPS uses a asymmetric encryption, which is the case where you have two different types of keys. You have a public key, which you use to actually lock data, and you only have one private key, and the private key is the only key that can unlock data. So this is an additive security that prevents people from just unlocking data if they have the public key, sorry. But again, that's more of an encryption topic, and we'll be covering encryption in week 9. So that will be the lesson after our recess week. And if you're interested in encryption and more of the, I guess, advanced topics about what asymmetric encryption, symmetric encryption is, feel free to join us in week 9. So as usual, like I said, the attacker only sees the encrypted data, and the server can decrypt the data with the key. So HTTPS prevents attackers from intercepting a password while it's in the process of being transmitted, right? But the web server actually has to store the passwords as well. What happens if the hacker attacks the web server and gains access to the database? In this case, this becomes another issue, and this is what we're talking about when we talk about password security. So storing passwords is actually a pretty interesting topic because there are multiple ways you can do it. Obviously, the worst way is to store it as a plain text. So in this slide, we talk about, should we just store passwords in plain text? Well, obviously, no, right? Because if your passwords are stored in plain text, the hacker can just come in and look at the text and boom, your passwords are compromised. And that's obviously not what we want, because once a password is compromised, once passwords are compromised, it's a huge vulnerability for all the users, because let's be real, how many of you actually use your passwords, you reuse the same passwords over multiple sites? And you don't have to answer, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people have like one password to use multiple times, or even if they try to change things up, it's a small variation, like they change the number, or they change one letter, or they add like a full stop, something like that. It's just, I mean, it's one of the biggest security issues in the industry right now, where people actually reuse passwords. And if you reuse passwords, you essentially increase the amount of vulnerabilities, or you increase the surface for vulnerabilities for yourself, because you never know if a web service is unsecure. And if any one web service is compromised, all the sites that you're using the same password for instantly become compromised as well. So that's one thing to take note of. And you never know if a service is storing some plain text, so you can't be too sure. So if you have to take away from this, it's just don't reuse your passwords. And if you think you're safe just because you don't use any shady services, it's a little bit of a complicated issue, because there have been actors like Facebook and Google who've actually been reviewed to store passwords in plain text due to bugs or due to any sort of malicious developers within their company itself. So again, the takeaway here is just don't use passwords. And we also talked about encryption just now, right? Where we encrypt data before sending it over the internet. So what if we just store the encrypted password on the database itself? And if you think about that, sure, the hacker can't decrypt the data, because when they look at the database, it's just encrypted text. But if a database is compromised, the chances are that the key that is being used to lock and unlock these passwords are also compromised. So if an attacker can receive the key from the website, the web server, then it's basically as bad as having no security at all, right? Because all the hacker needs to do is take the key, decrypt the password, and again, they have all the passwords, and you have the same issues of compromised passwords. And for many users who reuse the passwords, it's a huge issue. So the main topic of this lesson is about hashing. But before that, we actually have a quick hands-on activity. I would like you guys to try using this website. Have I been pawned? Other ways to decrypt without the keys. So Gerald asked a question about whether are there any ways to decrypt without any keys? And the answer is a little bit complicated, because it's mathematically impossible up to a certain extent. So with traditional computational methods, with normal computers, how they encrypt data is by using something called a prime factorization. So they take two very large numbers and multiply it, and you get one very, very large number. And to unlock it, you just have to find you have to factorize this number into the two prime numbers that make up this number. So it's easy to multiply numbers together because computers can do it really fast. But it's very hard for computers to calculate the primes, the prime factors of a number, and exponentially so when the number is very large. So it's mathematically impossible, in the sense that it's very, very unlikely that any computer in this age can actually decrypt data without the keys. But an interesting note is actually a theoretical perspective in terms of quantum computing. So with quantum computing, there've actually been algorithms developed that could potentially decrypt data by figuring out these prime factors using quantum math. And it's currently a theoretical algorithm, but with the rise of quantum computing, it's actually becoming more of an issue, because it's possible to actually figure out the decrypted data without the keys. But then again, it's still a huge debate, because there are critics who say that it's impossible to get a quantum computer up to a certain standard because of technical limitations. And there are those who think that quantum computers will never reach a stage where it can actually calculate the prime factors of numbers that are as large as the numbers that we use currently. So very good question, actually. So right now, no, but in the future, potentially. But by then, we should have developed new algorithms to have better encryption that will also be quantum computer safe. And in fact, most encryption is currently quantum computer safe. They've actually upgraded most of the encryption algorithms. So thank you, Gerald, for the question. All right, now back to the hands-on. I hope you guys also looked at this website when I was answering his question. If you go to Have I Been Pawned, it essentially takes your user account emails and it searches the internet for any sort of leaks or breaches that include your data in it. So if you just go and try this out, if anyone has 0 breaches, then really great for you. I think that's really wonderful. But I think most people should have at least 1 or 2 breaches. And this again emphasizes the need for us to not reuse passwords when we are online. Yeah, so I hope you guys get some perspective on the vulnerability of multiple websites having your passwords. And again, like I said, this week's content is mostly about hashing. So to explain what a hash is, we have to talk about what a hash function is. So a hash function basically takes, like I said in the slides, it takes an input and it produces some sort of fixed length output. And this output has a few properties that make it really good for passwords. One, it's deterministic, meaning that if you have one password, so if you have one input, it will always get the exact same output every time you hash it. So if I put in my password, I'll always get the same hash back from that hashing function. And it's also fixed size. So no matter how big or small my password is, the result I get back is always the same length. And it's also uniform, meaning that if I put in, let's say, 123, and I get a hash, it is impossible for me to figure out what the hash for 124 is. Or I can't guess the next hash based on my current hash, because the hashes that come out of this hash function is uniform, so it's completely random as to what the hash will be. And the most critical part of a hash function is that it is one way, or it is non-invertible. And what I mean by that is that given one output, let's say I have a hash, it is mathematically impossible, infeasible to determine an input. So I won't say impossible, but it's almost impossible. And the reason why this is so good for passwords is because, let's say the web server stores your passwords in its hashed form. If a hacker breaches the website and it gets access to the database, all it has is the password hashes. And the hacker can't really do anything with these hashes because, so what? All they have is a hash. These hashes are different, and the hacker can't really use this to do anything. They can't use it to log in. They can't use it to. And this is one huge plus for why we use hashes for password security. So I've been a bit gassy. So how this works is that when you send a password across to the web server, you encrypt it, the server decrypts it, and then it takes this password and it hashes it with the same method that it used for storing your password. And once it hashes it, it compares the hash that it has in the database with the hash that it got from the result. And if it matches, it knows that the input must have been the same. And that's how they determine that, oh, this guy's legit. So say, oh, great, this guy is logging in, and I'll let him come in. And if the input is different, then the hash that you get is different, and you compare the hashes is different, then it will say, no, it's not valid. You can't log in. So that's how it works, and that's the general idea for why we hash we hash passwords. But of course, when I talk about hash function, there are multiple ways you can implement a hash function, because not all hash functions are equal. And we have multiple algorithms like MD5, SHA-0, SHA-1, all these technical terms. But if I had to give an example for a really, really simple hash function, think of a function that returns you whether a number is positive or negative. That's as simple as a hash function could be. So my hash function could be, let's say I have a function that returns true if it's positive and returns false if it's negative. Ultimately, it satisfies the requirements for a hash function, right? If I put in 1, I will receive true. If I put in -1, I'll receive false. No matter how many times I put in 1, I'll always get true. But of course, this is a useless hash function in this case because the only two possible outcomes you have is one as true and false, and that's kind of useless for passwords, right? But essentially, all these algorithms do the same thing. They take an input and they produce an output, and this output is always consistent. The only difference is that these algorithms do some fancy math to get a very large number and have a very broad space such that you can have multiple outputs that are all different based on the input that you give. And I would say one of the most fundamental hashing algorithms online is called MD5, or I don't know what it stands for, but if you're interested, you can search it up and you can put it in the chat for me. That'd be great. So what MD5 does is that it takes any input and it produces a fixed 128-bit hash. Oh, I just realized the slides are not available for you guys. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. I just got an email. All right. And let me just give you guys a link actually. All right, there you go. Hopefully, whoever's trying to get access to the slides. So the slides are in the chat. Sorry about that. Rookie mistake, right? Yeah. So back to the content. MD5 is one of the precursors, one of the earliest hashing algorithms, and it creates a 128-bit hash. So it has 128 possible values, and that's a pretty big number. But the algorithm that MD5 uses has been shown to be a little bit susceptible to collision attacks. So what a collision attack is essentially, researchers have been able to find inputs, different inputs that have produced the same output. So we call this a collision because given two inputs, they try to fit into the same output and they collide. So they both receive the same output, and this is an issue with security because if you can find collisions, it means that there are passwords out there that are less secure because this password could be, let's say it's this password and this password, A and B, they both produce the same hash. It means that the person who uses the password A can also log in the password B if the web server uses MD5. And that's not a good thing because that just increases the chances of breaches, and overall it's just not a good sight. And like I said, MD5 has been shown to have collisions. And if you take MD5 and you apply it to this image and this image, these two images actually produce the exact same MD5 hash. So these two images look completely different, but ultimately they have the same MD5 hash. And like I said, it's not a very good thing for a password security. The alternative is something called SHA, or Shaw's hashing algorithm, I think. So what it does is that it produces a 256-bit hash. 256 is a very big number. In fact, it's almost as many atoms as we have in the entire observable universe. I think 10 times less than the number of atoms in the entire observable universe. But it has way more atoms than our galaxy, in fact. So SHA-2 is currently the standard, but like we mentioned in the slide, SHA-0 actually has collisions and MD5 has collisions. And SHA-1 is theoretical that you can find collisions with SHA-1, but with SHA-2 so far everything is pretty fine. So all the different families of SHAs are so far so good. SHA-2, right? So I just spent the entire past half hour telling you how hashing functions are non-reversible. You can't go backwards, only one way. With that knowledge, how do you think we actually break passwords, and how do we find passwords to break? Or how do we crack passwords? And the solution is just to pre-compute. Exactly, yeah. So the idea is that we take a lot of common passwords, we hash it the same function that the server is using, and we get a bunch of outputs. And using these outputs, we can essentially try to figure out which input was used to create this output. So yes, Joe, exactly, that's right. We figure out the hashing algorithm that the website is using, and then we create a dictionary of hash passwords using the same algorithm. Yep, a dictionary, or in this case, a table. So yeah, pre-computing. So we store all the different passwords inputs, and we store the hashes. And let's say I found this hash 827cc, blah, blah. I can look up my table, and if I find a table, I can find a password. And of course, the bigger your table, the better your ability to actually pre-compute these hashes, right? So there's actually a lot of online resources that have compiled a bunch of these tables, and one of them is called md5hashing.net/hash. And I have this hash for you over here. I'm gonna copy it into the chat. And I guess it's no big deal, but it's not a big exercise, but I think you guys will find it fun to just try to figure out what this hash says. We're essentially pre-computing it using this database. I've added the entry to the database, so it should be easy. So it's actually pretty straightforward, but hopefully the experience of dehashing this hash helps you understand how this hash works. So this is an output of a MD5 hash. I think I forgot to mention. This is an MD5 hash, and this is the output that I've gotten from hashing a certain secret. So this secret should be on a database, and if you do a reverse lookup using a database, you should be able to get the initial flag. So that's the database. Let me just zoom way in. So they have a description here basically telling you that this is one of the largest hashing libraries, hashing databases on the internet with 2 billion records. So people have entered 2 billion different passwords and have gotten 2 billion different hashes using different algorithms. So the exercise is to use MD5, copy the hash, anyone got it yet? All right, decode it. Decrypting. We might have overloaded this poor website. Did anyone manage to get the decryption earlier? You might have killed this website. Oh no. Well, this website's a lot less resilient than I thought it would be, but never mind. We will save the exercise for later on, I guess. We'll see how long it takes for it to reverse. Yep, so Charlotte used another site and it says non database because what I did was that I actually encrypted my password using this database. So this database has stored the record. So I want to re-emphasize that it is nearly impossible to go from a hash back to the input. But what this website is doing is that it takes all the inputs that people have put in, it hashes it, and it gets the output, and it stores that relation. So it stores the input and output. And then when you search up the hash on the website, it will look up the table and find the input that produces output. So if I didn't put it into the other website, then this other website won't have it in a database. So this table is what they store in a database. Yeah. Oh man, I forgot the actual input I put in, so I guess we'll never know. Oh, well, some other time. If anyone gets through this website, then let me know. But thanks, Charlotte, for trying out on a different website. I think that helped me emphasize the point. And thanks, Gerald and Chris for mentioning that it's taken forever because I did not realize it's broken. But here comes another solution then. So what if we don't have a database of all the passwords, or what if it's not found in a database? In this case, what we can do is we can essentially brute force, or the brute forcing just meaning like we just try every single combination of A, B, C's until we actually find a password. Or we can use a dictionary attack where we use the most common words, like say my cat, battery, horse, stable. And we'll just take all these words and combine it, and they'll try to figure out most commonly used passwords and hopefully find the proper hash. And if you think you're safe from brute forcing or dictionary attacks because you substitute your E's for threes or you substitute your A's for fours, be wary that most modern dictionary attack programs actually substitute these things automatically. So in the end, even if you use multiple words, it's more secure than using it's more secure than using just short passwords, but it's still possible for these programs to figure out your password. So yeah, so one lesson is don't reuse passwords, and second lesson is don't rely on like short passwords essentially. And for this exercise, I actually do need you guys to install a program, but I understand that it's a bit difficult for many people to install these programs in the 1 hour span of our lesson. So I'll leave out the slide on the side here for you guys to try out. For Mac or Ubuntu users, you can use your package managers like brew or apt-get. And for Windows, you can actually visit the site to download the program itself. But what I have here is actually 3 very short passwords that I've accidentally leaked, and they use the MD5 hash. So I'd like to demo a program that helps you brute force these hashes. So I'll give you some time to download the program. And for Mac users, I think if you guys are still here, I would love to introduce you to something called Homebrew. Because Homebrew essentially lets you just install programs you need using the brew command, BREW. Very useful. Definitely try to use brew if you can, because it saves you the trouble like dragging and dropping all the things. And for Windows, if you guys are interested in a package manager, there's something called Chocolatey. So it's Chocolatey, CHOCOLATEY. It's the same thing, but it's not as supported as I would say brew or apt-get. But let me just give you guys about 5 minutes to install the program. And once you have the program installed, if you type John, I guess it's John V. Never mind. If you type John, you'll see that you have John the Ripper 1.9. Is the text too small, by the way? Because I understand that sometimes it's a bit. Yeah. And at the same time, you can download this file, leak. If you click it, it's just a list of 3 passwords, very simple passwords. And I guess I want to introduce you to how you crack passwords. And if you're curious as to what the Z command is, just let me know. I can introduce you to Z as well. Z is very useful. All right. Just take some time to get the program running. If you have any issues, just put it into the chat and I'll get to you as soon as I can. So for Mac users, John Jungle. And while you're here, you can see some of the programs I installed. With Brew, you can actually install a lot of different things. Yeah, I already have John Jungle installed here, so that basically helps me with a lot of Brew helps me install a lot of programs essentially. All right, it's 8:40. I think I'll continue the lesson. So let's say we have the passwords. Okay, let me just. Okay, let me just. So these are the hashes that we have, right? 54, F54, E36, and EF. And ECF. To use John, I actually have the slide over here. To use John, you just have to tell John what format or what hashing algorithms was used to hash these passwords, and where the passwords are essentially. And there are programs you can use to figure out what kind of hash was used for these hashes. So what kind of hashing functions were used to get these hashes. But I'll add that as a further resource in the further resources section, and you can find out more about that if you'd like to. So let's begin with the actual cracking because it's going to take a while actually. So John format. So John format raw MD5 MD5 passwords.txt. And if I run this, you notice that the first password it got is just password. So one of the passwords is just password. Horrible password, but that's you'd be surprised how many people actually do that, right? So the first one is actually done with a word list. And this one is actually essentially they have a list of commonly used passwords and they match it with the hashes. So this rule word list means that password is one of the most common passwords and they actually store it as a pre-computed value. Incremental is ASCII means that they are actually going through every step. And if you hit a key, right, it actually tells you, okay, we're currently in these passwords. We're currently in between 863 AAF to 863 A78. So basically, they're going through every single possible combination until they find a password. And if you notice here, we actually found 3 passwords. We found password, we found CHF, and we found FL4G. And if you notice, it took quite a substantial amount of time, even for like a password that's only 4 characters long. And I've tried this just now, but it takes very, very long for us to actually dehash a password that's even 6 characters long. So even a 6 character long password takes a lot more time than you think. I think for every character you add to the password, it adds about 30 times. It adds 30 times the actual computational time required to compute these passwords. But because our lesson's only 1 hour long and we're not leaving this on for like the entire day, I just left this a short password for you. So the passwords are just password, CHF, and FL4G. And what John the Ripper is doing is essentially it looks up a word list, and then it looks through every incremental. It basically increments through every single possible text combination to find CHF and FL4G flag. So that's all there is to the John the Ripper tool. I hope you guys find that a little bit interesting about how these tools work. And if you want to learn more about John, just you can always search on Google about all the different guides for how to use John for different purposes. And this also brings us to a point about password complexity. Like I said, with every character you add, you're increasing the amount of time it takes to find a password by about 30 times, because it takes the computer, it has to search through another 30 times the number of permutations and combinations before it finds the password. So the longer your password, the more secure it is. And of course, my laptop's it's just a laptop. So imagine if you have a really powerful computer that's running these password crackers nonstop. they can do that much faster. But of course, by increasing the length of your password, you can make it a lot harder for people to actually brute force your passwords. So again, longer passwords are more secure. Don't reuse passwords, and make them as complex as possible. So include stuff like numbers and letters and punctuation to increase the number of possible characters they can use. And these things help your password safety. And on that note, I would actually like to bring up a really, I guess, something that I think should be very advocated. So I think a lot of people don't really use password managers because you either use a code in your head, like, oh, I'll combine these letters on my on this site, or I have a code for this thing, and I'll use this code to just have passwords all in my head. But all worst case is you just reuse the password and you just add like 123 to the back of it based on like which version needs to be. And of course, it's understandable because there are a lot of different sites and there are a lot of different accounts you have to use. But like I said, if one site is compromised, your password is leaked to the entire internet. Essentially, every account that uses the password becomes insecure. And this isn't a matter of how secure your password is, because no matter how strong a password is, as long as one person or one website stores a password in plain text, you're essentially out of luck, because all your effort into memorizing this code and like figuring out how to encrypt the password in your own head, it goes to waste because one site messed up and now all your passwords are leaked. And even if you use a code, it's possible for hackers or attackers to figure out the code and just use that code to breach all of your different accounts. And if you're under the impression that, oh, I'm not that important, nobody's going to attack my accounts, just note that even if you're not notorious, some hackers might actually be using your account for the sake of phishing your contacts, so they can use your accounts to pretend to be you to get more information from your contacts, or they can use your account as part of a denial of service attack, or there are multiple things you can do with your password. So there is interest in getting your password, even if you're a so-called nobody. So nobody is safe, and that's why you should always use a password manager, because a password manager ensures a few things. One is that the passwords will be very long and truly random, such that there's no pattern or code that attackers can actually figure out. And two, they ensure that you will never forget your passwords. And three, it gives you a central place to ensure that all your passwords are always secure in one spot. And I think a lot of people are averse to password managers because it's the idea of having all your eggs in one basket versus having multiple baskets to ensure your eggs aren't dropped. And I think you should really shift your perception to the fact that it's not about having multiple baskets, because, like I said, if one password is breached, all your passwords are breached. So if one egg is broken from one weak basket, every egg is broken. But with one guaranteed strong password, you can ensure that this basket is so-called secure and is cryptographically secure, such that no matter how many of your websites are compromised, they will be independent from your other accounts. And that's why password managers are, I think, very, very useful and very important if you want to be secure. Of course, don't let me be the only person that tells you to use password manager. You can definitely search out your own options. I didn't recommend any services because I think if you're interested, you should definitely search out do your own research, and do your own, I guess, evaluation for whether password managers are a good thing for you. I would say that definitely, my opinion is definitely use a password manager because that's the most secure thing. But do your own research. All right, moving on from that, the last topic we have is something called salting. So what a salt is essentially a long random piece of data that they can attach to your password or your secure secret before you hash it. And in this way, by adding this piece of random text or random information, you make it a lot harder for attackers to pre-compute your passwords. For example, in this case, we have password and we add a salt. So let's say my password is again my password, but this time the service actually stores a salt of this text. Now, before they actually hash my password, they'll add the salt to my password and they hash it, and they get this random piece of text. This is my hash. Now, when I log in, they'll just take this salt again, they'll add it to my logged in password, and it would compare the hash using this salt. And the reason why we do this is because it's a lot less likely for hackers to pre-compute these salts, because these salts are random. So there's no way they can just have like the most commonly used passwords plus random text. So in the database that we had just now, like what Charlotte mentioned, she couldn't find the piece of text that I put into the database because she couldn't find the piece of text, or she couldn't find a hash that matches the text I put in, because she was using a different database. So it's the same idea in this case. We essentially create a different hash based on the password by using a salt. So the chances of someone pre-computing this salt and password becomes a lot less. Therefore, your password is a lot more secure when it's stored. But of course, if a hacker has compromised the database, they will know all the different salts, and they can just brute force it the exact same way. The only extra step is they have to add a little bit of salt to your password. So it doesn't slow down brute force or dictionary attacks. It just makes it a lot less likely for pre-computed attacks to actually work. And I'd like to end off by pointing into more resources for stuff like how to identify which kind of hash is being used, and in terms of what a salt is and like how salts work. An interesting thing is something called a rainbow table attack, and I won't cover it here, but a rainbow table essentially, it's a way of pre-computing our passwords and finding the input really, really fast. And this is more relevant to our encryption workshop, but I would like to introduce you to CyberChef as well. I'll just add this in here. So what CyberChef is essentially a program that lets you put in different little formulas you want here and compute the outputs. So let's say I want to take a hashing function, MD5, and after MD5, I want to, let's say, encode to, let's say, where's base64? To base64. So all this is to take some hello world, and you'll convert it to the output based on the formula you have. So it's just a really useful tool for doing a bunch of manipulations to your data, and you can even put images and stuff like that. So that's a really useful online tool for general encoding, encryption, and hashing. Just a little fun tool you can use. And with that, that's the end of this week's lesson. And I hope you guys enjoyed the hands-on and also the content. And once again, wrong button. Once again, I'd like to remind everyone that we're having a bonding week. So next week's not going to be a lesson. It's going to be a bonding session for you guys. So if you're interested in just meeting the other White Hat members, or just finding more friends within White Hats and playing a little game, and also like trying out a very, very beginner, trust me, it's a very beginner CTF, just for fun, and I guess have a chance to win some prizes or like earn some, just have a sense of accomplishment, I guess. I don't know. If you're interested in that, definitely sign up for our bonding session, and I'm going to put a link in the chat right here. All right, so it's in the chat. It should be. Bro, this thing's killing me. There you go. Took a bit of effort. Yeah. So thank you guys for joining us for this lesson, and I hope you guys had a good night and have a good weekend coming up ahead. For those of you who have midterms tomorrow, all the best, and I guess have fun, work hard, and good luck for your exams. that's all we have for this week. All right, have a good night. No, 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 don't worry about it. I think it was my mistake. I forgot to put the permissions up, but yeah. Thank you everyone for joining us again. And I'll stick around for any questions you guys might have. But other than that, that's all we have.